Hello, CEI participants. This is AJ Adams, the president of the Nevada Association of School Administrators, with another mentorship video on your quest to continue growing as a leader. In this video, we are going to discuss trust and empathy and how they not only are vital components of leadership, they're also equally as vital when mentoring. The foundation of effective mentoring and coaching is trust. You absolutely must create and foster trust in the mentor-mentee relationship, as your mentee must feel safe in order to admit their own faults at times and be able to confide in you with anything from not being confident or stressed out and anxiety-ridden. Now, as a mentor, you must not only guide your mentees through these types of issues, but whatever they disclose must be locked in your vault. We talked about confidentiality and locking things in your vault, unless, of course, someone discloses that they've done something illegal or immoral and you're obligated to report it. When I'm formally mentoring or coaching someone, I always tell this to them up front. This is where I start. I say that our interactions are 100% confidential and that whatever you tell me will be locked in my vault forever, unless you disclose something that I'm obligated to report. So it's very easy to just put that out in front, at the forefront, and a lot of times that will diffuse any anxiety that they have as far as any trusting relationship. Now, as we know, a trusting relationship does take time to build up. So I also tell anybody that I'm mentoring or coaching that I expect the same from them. So as in a true mentor-mentee relationship, I also need to be open and authentic, which might mean that I tell them some of my own insecurities as a leader and provide examples of mistakes that I've made in the past. Some mistakes that maybe I don't want out there in the general public. So it really should go both ways, trust. Now, I do want to share with you this one quote on trust that I found, and it's so powerful, yet it's a quote that I've never heard before. Breaking someone's trust is like crumpling up a perfect piece of paper. You can smooth it over, but it's never going to be the same again. Now, the funny thing about trust is it takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. I'm sure that you have seen and heard that quote as well. Harvard Business Review conducted a study on the 3 elements of trust. They analyzed data from 360 assessments of 87,000 leaders. They were able to identify 3 key clusters of items that are often the foundations of trust. Now, by understanding the behaviors that underlie and are within trust, we as leaders are able to elevate the level of trust that others feel towards us. The first element of trust revolves around positive relationships. Trust is in part based on the extent to which a leader is able to create positive relationships with other people as well as within groups. Now, to instill trust, a leader must do the following. Number 1, stay in touch on the issues and concerns of others. Number 2, balance results with concerns for others. This is a big one. Now, as a leader, if you're only focusing on results and the quote-unquote proverbial bottom line with no concern for others, you probably aren't going to be trusted very much, nor will people feel that you value them. Number 3, you should also generate cooperation between others. And number 4, a leader must resolve conflict with others. Not by telling them to just go figure it out, you're adults, or follow the chain of command, but by really sitting down with 2 employees that are having issues and aren't able to resolve it themselves. Now, sit down with them, you're the leader, you have them hash things out, but you're there and you are facilitating those conversations, and you're there to ensure that the conflict is resolved and form a plan to move forward so that the conflict doesn't arise again. Now, by the way, this is a great activity to model with your mentee or with others on your leadership team, and especially for those new leaders that have not had the opportunity to do so. The second element of trust revolves around having good judgment and expertise. So the leader needs to be well informed and knowledgeable. They must understand the technical aspects of the work as well as have a depth of experience. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to have work experience in every single role within the organization that you're leading. However, if you have a very limited and narrow knowledge base, then when you're leading others on a wider scale, it may cause some issues. This also means leaders use good judgment when making decisions. Others trust their ideas and opinions, and they listen when they speak. Others seek after their opinions and ask those leaders for guidance and perhaps even to be their mentor. The third and final element of trust that Harvard found is consistency. This is the extent to which leaders walk the walk and talk the talk and do what they say that they are going to do, and most importantly, they follow through and they follow up. Based on this study, people will rate a leader high in trust if they, one, are a role model and consistently set a good example, if they walk the walk and talk the talk, if they honor commitments and keep their promises. Remember, it's always better to underpromise and overdeliver than it is to overpromise and underdeliver. Leaders also rated high in trust if they follow through on commitments and follow up with those that they are leading. And finally, if the leader is willing to go above and beyond what needs to be done. Now, they completed the study wanting to understand how these three elements interacted together to create the likelihood that people will trust a leader. They compiled the data set and they found that if a leader scored at or above the 60th percentile in all three factors, the leader's overall trust score would be at the 80th percentile. They then compared the high scores above the 60th percentile and the low scores below the 40th percentile to examine the impact that these three elements have on trust. Now, I must point out to you that these levels are not extremely high, nor are they extremely low. Basically, they are 10 points above and below the norm, which in this case is the 50th percentile. This is extremely important because it means that being just above average on these skills can have a profound positive impact on trust. And conversely, just being below average can absolutely destroy trust. They also found that levels of trust is highly correlated with how people rate a leader's overall leadership effectiveness. This has the strongest impact on the direct reports as well as peer overall ratings. Now you might ask, well, I have 2 out of the 3 levels of trust, down pat. Do I really need all 3 elements of trust? Well, glad you might ask. They were also curious to know if leaders needed to be skilled in all 3 elements to generate a high level of trust, and whether any one particular element had the most significant impact on the trust rating. So to gauge this, they created an experiment where they separated leaders into high and low levels on each of the 3 pillars and then measured the levels of trust. Intuitively, they thought that consistency would be the most important element. Saying one thing and doing another seems like it would definitely hurt trust the most. While their analysis showed that inconsistency does have a negative impact, trust went down by 17 points, it was relationships that had the most substantial impact. When relationships were low and both judgment and consistency were high, trust went down by 33 points. Now, this may be because many leaders are seen as occasionally inconsistent. We are all human. We all intend to do things that don't get done, and I'm certainly guilty of taking on too much at the same time. But once a relationship is damaged, or if it was never formed in the first place, it's extremely difficult for people to trust you as a leader. We often tell people that they don't need to be perfect to be an excellent leader. But when it comes to trust, all 3 of these elements need to be above average. Remember that in their analysis, they set the bar fairly low, only at the 60th percentile. So this is not a brilliant or stellar level of performance. It's barely above average. Additionally, they regularly found that in their research that if a leader has a preference for a particular skill, they are more likely to perform better at it. So think about which of these 3 elements of trust you have a stronger preference for. You lean more towards that. That's more your go-to. And which do you prefer the least? Because as you've just heard, you as a leader need to be above average on each one of these categories. It's probably worth your time to focus on improving the elements of trust that you prefer or align with the least. Now let's transition to empathy. How does empathy impact the mentor-mentee relationship and those that you lead? Remember, leaders lose trust if they only focus on the bottom line and don't care about others. Empathy is the ability to understand and share someone's feelings. Now, this does not mean that you feel the exact same way that they do, only that you understand and can understand how they feel. Empathy, a lot of times, is often confused with sympathy, which is feeling pity or sorry for somebody. Mentees typically look for empathy from a mentor because the mentor has already been in the mentee's shoes before. So when a mentor empathizes with a mentee, they're connecting with a time when they know and remember how the mentee feels because they've had a similar experience in the past. The ability to empathize often at times separates a mentor from a coach. So professional coaches often sympathize with somebody and they feel sorry for them because they themselves have not been in a similar situation before. It's important to remember that mentors have the ability to truly empathize because they have been there and they have been in the mentee's shoes, which can strengthen a connection way faster than a coach's might. While facing difficult situations or adversity, a mentee or those on your leadership team may feel like they are the only ones who are struggling. They're the only ones that feel like that they've ever faced this issue before. Nobody wants to feel out of control, and certainly nobody wants to feel like they are all alone on an island. Typically, when we struggle with difficult issues or adversity, our emotions come into play. And emotions are very powerful, as you know, and they can keep us from making an irrational appraisal of our situation. So essentially, the emotions take over, and we can't step out of the situation and step back to see things clearly in order to make the best decision possible. When this happens, a mistake that many mentors make due to the mentee being emotional or irrational is that they go straight into problem solving, which, as we've discussed many times before, and I'm sure you hear it in your head, mentors are guides. We are guides, not essentially problem solvers. Additionally, going straight into problem solving can cause the trust that a mentor and mentee have built up to possibly plateau or even erode. Frequently, without adequate empathy, a mentee can feel belittled. My feelings aren't important. They also can feel ignored. My mentor isn't listening to me, especially if you just go straight to problem solving. They can also feel foolish in any number of emotional responses or feelings. They can feel foolish and say to themselves, I'm the only one who has been tripped up by this issue. My mentee has all this experience and they've never, faced this type of adversity. And so when you just go straight to problem solving and you don't listen and you don't empathize with them, then a lot of these other barriers to your mentor and mentee relationship can come up. Now, it's very important to realize that the ability to feel and express empathy is very difficult to teach somebody. However, it can be improved. So this goes back to the whole self-awareness and what is our leadership styles, right? So if you're not by nature a very empathetic leader or person or mentor, so it's not your fault or anybody's fault. It just is what it is. But here are a few ways that you can empathize with a mentee. Number one, emphasize a safe place and your vault, right? By reminding your mentee, that the mentoring conversation is a safe place. The mentor is giving the mentee permission. I'm going to give you as my mentee permission to get your feelings out and express them without judgment, without anybody else knowing about it, right? So such validation can allow the mentee to let go of some of that emotion. Another thing that I found valuable is, remember, just because you told them that they can trust you and your conversations are confidential the first time that you met and you began mentoring them, whether this was just within the last month or whether it was a year ago, this does not mean that you never have to reassure them or ever have to say it again. A lot of times those reassurances, especially when people are facing issues or going through adversity, means the world to them. And it will actually create a much deeper bond in the mentor-mentee relationship. Another way that you can empathize with a mentee is to use feeling words to identify and validate the emotions. Often, naming an emotion goes a long way to making a mentee or employee feel understood. So instead of saying, I understand, that seems to have been the magical word in the past, I understand, and thinking that that phrase is just going to magically solve everything, say, I can see that this makes you very frustrated. This creates an opening for a mentee to acknowledge their own feelings of being frustrated, and you are just calling it right out instead of saying, I understand. Another way to empathize with your mentee is to relate to your own experiences that you've had in the past. The feeling of empathy, as we've said before, comes from being able to relate to someone else's experience. As a mentor, you are more likely than others to have faced similar issues that your mentee is facing. So I found it useful to also share your experiences using the 3 F's: feel, felt, found. So whatever the issue might be, let's say they did not get hired for a position, or they didn't get hired during their first interview for an assistant principal position. You can say to your mentee, I can see that you feel dejected and upset that you weren't hired for that position. I have felt that way in the past when it took me multiple interviews to finally get hired. What I have found is that there were always lessons to learn after each interview, and the more I did it, the better I became at it. So using those 3 F's, feel, felt, and found, you can walk through almost any circumstance or adverse situation that your mentee is going through if you've had a similar experience in the past. And for most of us that are in the mentorship program, or those of us that are formally mentoring, we've pretty much had almost every experience that you can. Now finally, you can then test to see if your mentee is ready to start considering solutions, right? So the longer the issue has been festering, the longer it may take for the mentee to let go of the emotions. You don't want to hurry your mentee along too quickly if the emotions haven't been resolved or fully explored or expressed. So ask your mentee if they want to start thinking about solutions, start brainstorming about solutions, or if the time would be better spent continuing to talk through the emotions. So there you have it, trust and empathy, 2 vital components to being an effective leader and mentor. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode, as always, and have either added some new tools to your leadership and mentor toolkit, or are sharpening and polishing the ones that you already have in there. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and go out there and strive to become a better leader today than you were yesterday.